Kia ora, everyone. Lovely to meet you. I'm Sophia from Catalyze, and I will be a tech person for this room today. Thank you for joining us for our Thursday session. We're coming closer to the end of this Ako week, so I'll just take a minute to do a little bit of Zoom housekeeping. Oh, sorry about that. Okay, I'll do it simple way. So we remind you that our sessions are being recorded and they will be on our website and YouTube channel, so others can watch them later. We ask you to keep yourself on mute, but if you want to ask the question later on, raise your question and unmute yourself. And please introduce yourselves and ask questions in the chat. And we encourage you to use gallery view so you can view everyone and some familiar and new faces, and keep your video on if possible. And that's it from me, Mike.
Oh, well, tēnā koutou katoa, ko Mike Fischler, aho, and it is lovely that you've all joined us. And so I'm one of the, we call ourselves the conveners, the motley crew who are sort of behind or on or whatever it might be on Placemaking Aotearoa. And actually, I've been too busy to get to some of the other sessions this week, so it's been nice that I get to facilitate this one, and look forward to the one tomorrow. So I really, when we were thinking about some topics earlier in the year, I really wanted to explore sort of local government and placemaking and what it looks like to have placemaking practice embedded in local government. My background's mostly local government, and I work for a local government agency and then do some consulting on the side. And I have met some awesome people throughout my career, and I wanted to talk to them today and sort of get their insights and expertise, ask hopefully some curly questions, and you might have some questions at the end. Because I think it's a bit of a, sometimes a tough frontier. It's a really energizing frontier, local government, you know, and how we get this, these placemaking approaches embedded is probably something that people are grappling with up and down the country, and as we'll hear, over in Australia and beyond as well. So yeah, so I've got together a really interesting group of people from Australia and New Zealand to sort of talk. We'll run through some questions. I'll be asking them questions, and then hopefully we have some time at the end for some questions from yourselves. And then at 1 o'clock, the discussion will finish, but we'll have an extra half hour if anyone wants to stay on and talk about, right, where do we go as Placemaking Aotearoa? What does this mean? Is there some things that we can do, particularly within local government? So I'm going to start just getting the panel just to introduce themselves. So I'm going to start with Joanne over in Brisbane. Joanne.
Sure. Hi, good morning, everyone. I'm very pleased to be here. I'm Jo from Design Brisbane at Brisbane City Council. I was initially from Cape Town. I'm the team leader for the placemaking team, which is a capital projects delivery program that deals with placemaking through infrastructure improvements and things like that. So from an architecture, urban design background, and I'm very pleased to be here. So thank you for the opportunity. I'll pass it on to my Design Brisbane colleague, Geoff.
Hi, everyone. Just reiterate, very happy to be here and see the New Zealand crew. So my role in Design Brisbane is the team leader of the Strategic Design and Innovation team, and I've got two parts to my job. One is to implement the Design-led City portfolio, and that's where we have our design values, which embed placemaking in our practice in council. So, and through the portfolio, we have demonstration and pilot projects, tactical urbanism, and so on, and activation, which with Joanne and my team's work, we really cover the whole spectrum, right through from one-day activations through to permanent projects and everything in between. So it's a very exciting time for us to be working and learning from other places, and also figuring out what works in Brisbane. On to you, Sara.
Thanks, Geoff. Hi, everyone. I just want to acknowledge that I'm here on Kaurna land here in Adelaide, and I currently work for the City of Charles Sturt in the placemaking team, but I got involved in placemaking back in 2014 with Mike Fisher with the City of Adelaide, when we were all sitting there wondering what placemaking and local government meant for Adelaide. And it's exciting to say it's moved on and progressed a lot since then. And in Charles Sturt, we're really about embedding placemaking principles from the get-go with our capital works projects, always having a place leader or someone with that capacity to look in on projects, whether that's capital works, footpath renewals, or community consultation. So very excited to be here today. Over to you, David.
Thanks, Sarah. Kia ora koutou, everybody. Called David Murphy, tuku ingoa. So I'm the Chief Planning Officer at Palmerston North City Council. So that's a role I've been in for about 3-4 months. So it's a role that sits on our executive leadership team at the council. So I've kind of moved to the dark side in some respects, but I'd like to think that it isn't that. But yeah, prior to that, I was the city planning manager for 10 years. And during that time, worked alongside Keegan, and then prior to that, Geoff Wilkinson, who's now over in Brisbane, on the early days of placemaking in Palmerston North. So and my current role is more of a sort of general manager role, looking after city planning, strategy and policy, community planning, Māori advisory, international relations and economic development. So it's kind of it's been a bit of a change for me, but placemaking's in the bones, and keen to stay connected to the placemaking community. And looking forward to the conversation today. Over to you, Keegan.
Kia ora, Dave. No London toku tipuna, no Papaioia ahau, ko Keegan Eplanthane toku ingoa. Keegan Eplanthane, planner at the Palmerston City Council. Been there for 7 years. Half of my roles traditional planning work and policy work, and then the other half's the really exciting agile bit that gets out in the public, following on from the great foundations that David and Geoff had paved for us at the time. So as far as placemaking goes, I'm in nappies compared to Geoff Wilkinson. I look up to him a lot. And also just wanted to announce to the crew, because I'm very proud now, I'm going to be a father soon, so we're going to have a little placemaker coming along to that 12-week scan, and the baby's kicking away in there. So we're gonna bring them into an awesome Palmerston North environment, stuff like that. So hopefully we the good work that we pave forward rubs off on the little ones. So back over to you there, Mike.
Oh, ka pai, Keegan. Congratulations. That's awesome. Great news to start the session. Today, I wanted to explore a couple of sort of themes, and one was culture within the organisation, and then sort of mechanics and systems and processes, and hopefully at the end there'll be some questions that might be outside of that, but the questions I'll be asking the panel are around that. So the first sort of placemaking is sort of action orientated, collaborative and solution focused. And I wanted to ask the group, the panel, how do we create that culture within local government from a leadership perspective? Because we've got sort of leaders and we've got sort of team doers and things. I don't think we're all doers, but from different perspectives. So how do we create that culture that enables people to act, to try, to do? So who wants to kick us off? Is there some response to that?
I'll give it a crack to start off with, Mike. So I'm at that kind of pleb level, you know, the guy on the ground. So don't quite have manager in my name yet, but don't need to. Sometimes don't want to as well. So being able to kind of help create a culture is very much in our council's been around good reciprocity. Being able to actually help your peers out and them help you back. And it's good karma. It helps you to, I suppose, build social capital so you can use it when most needed, and also builds a good, I suppose, sense of mutuality amongst you and your peers, whether it be, you know, the health and safety officer, the legal counsel, environmental health, and I suppose that trust building over time. It's a bit of a longer game sometimes, and it can be, it does get a little bit frustrating if it has to get picked back up if there's turnover in staff in areas, but I suppose it really does pay itself off in those ultimate times when it's needed. Yeah, that's just my piece. Maybe Geoff, if you've got a bit of whakaaro there coming from two different kind of realms.
Yeah, I think it's quite interesting in terms of the process of building culture and how long it can take. And I think, as you said, around sustaining the culture, Keegan, where, I've had the benefit of working both as a consultant with a range of size of local governments from very small towns through to metro councils, and to be able to see that the process of culture building is sort of consistent, depending on the size, or regardless of the size. It really comes down to that action orientation, and that by being focused on action, people get very interested. That's where the enthusiasm comes from. But then, as you say, it goes through a cycle, and with people and enthusiasm and programs that change, there is a big risk of how do we, after the initial effort to build a culture or kickstart a culture, how do you maintain it? And that's probably something that Joanne's good to speak on, because they're working on a project which is maintaining something and then changing it and developing things. And keen to hear what you think, Joe.
Yeah, well, thanks, Geoff. So yeah, building a culture, it takes time. The program that I've been running has been up and running for about 4 years and has 14 projects delivered. So we've now got quite a good basis to assess where we've gone wrong and where we can improve. And I'd say it's sort of in a nutshell, very, very quickly, we are dependent on good working relationships with our internal and external stakeholders. And one glitch along the way can completely derail a project. And it's common, every project has their glitches, and it's about how to get back on track and how to bring people along genuinely on the journey right from the start. So we've had to regroup and really sort of assess our lessons learned and create a process whereby the stakeholders have much investment in our projects, not necessarily financial investment, but professional investment, and that has come some way to being able to deal with these glitches that we face earlier, and to challenge rules and standards and other things that culturally have always been a major issue. So yeah, I would say it's very much a work in progress, and it's very much a start from the get-go to try and get buy-in and collaboration.
I can sorry.
You go, Sarah.
I am a pleb a little bit like Keegan, I guess, and just want to go, power to the to the workers, because you can sit in a very powerful position where you can, manage up and influence. And I've seen in local government, I guess, 2 different styles here in South Australia implementing placemaking. Both in the city of Charles Sturt and in the city of Adelaide, we have a dedicated placemaking team, and that's how we've got a voice at the table to begin with, to go to some of those projects and get involved from that role. In many ways, I think our role as in a placemaking team is almost to do ourselves out of a job by teaching others to also consider the value of place and how to better involve people from a consultation perspective, for example. The other way I've seen placemaking be embedded is at the city of Aotearoa, which is in the southern part of Adelaide, metropolitan Adelaide, and they actually did it from an internal perspective, where a placemaker assessed all their policies about how can they better embed placemaking principles across all their policies, and thereby, people that were holding those roles, they were the ones that were then taking on those new principles in those policies and rolling it out, which I think is also another interesting way to build the culture of placemaking in a organisation, because at the end of the day, we're all there in local government for the community, and we're all placemakers is how I see it. Don't always get that response, but that's how I see it. Sorry, David, and you had.
Well, David, as a manager, what's your perspective as a GM on this?
Yeah, I mean, it's something I've been reflecting a bit on, Mike, in the last few months as I've taken on my new role, and reflecting on our the city's Palmy's placemaking journey over the last decade or so. And I think local government as a sort of an ecosystem goes through these cycles and transitions. So if we think about probably the average life cycle of a mayor is maybe 6 years or so, and I know there's ones that are longer and hang on, and then with the change of mayor, you typically get a change in CEO, and sometimes senior leadership teams and things like that. And I've been thinking a little bit about, like how you maintain that sort of that prioritization and having placemaking at the forefront throughout to survive those changes. And one of the things I've been sort of reflecting on a bit is there's certain sweet spots throughout that that transition and life cycle of local government where you're better able to influence change, and there's also risky areas where you can lose control. So I think about our early placemaking journey. It was kind of at the end of it started at the end of a political cycle where a mayor had been in for a period of time, and we brought in some critical friends, and the critical friends, for instance, David Enwich, Charles Landry, they were pretty forthright and direct about what needed to change in Palmy, and the political landscape kind of meant that they were at the end of their sort of end of their journey, and they just sort of didn't worry too much, and then we had some new leaders come in, and we had to sort of upskill them, and we brought in some different people, and we brought in Peter Smith. So when you're a new politician, of course your mantra is the previous system was broken. So I think from my perspective, the opportunity to influence and drive change and build culture is ripe at that time when a politician's either at the end of their stint or when a new politician's coming in, because at the end they don't really care, and when they're starting out they're adamant that everything before them was broken. So that's just some thoughts, I guess, thinking about where you're at in your city and that political life cycle, and that what that might mean in terms of how you influence and drive change. Because I guess that's probably the political element. I've got a few thoughts about some of the the succession planning as well, but can talk about that a bit later on.
Is there anything, just before we finish with you, David, anything particularly you do with your teams, like to build that culture, to enable them to be action orientated, to sort of take that solution focus? Is there anything specifically you've done or do?
I think for managers, it's about getting out of the way. I mean, Keegan and I have been having a bit of a battle in the last week or two internally, and I guess as a manager that's coming in and lending support to Keegan for the activities he's doing, but we've got some other parts of the council that for whatever reason want to get in the way. So I see my role as just kind of being able to I guess provide some support to Keegan and get out the way as much as possible. And if I think the role of a manager is to provide people resources and remove barriers for them to do their job. And so sometimes those things appear in other parts of the organisation. So it's I mean, that sounds probably pretty simple, but it's
just to talk on what Dave was saying, and Geoff will attest to this as well, being under Dave's management previously, is that having a good kind of coach or whatnot in your corner to actually let you do good mahi and trust you to do work and take some good risks, and that allows you to transfer that trust onto the community or your external partners. If you don't have any trust behind you, you're watching your back because of the management structures in place. You can't transfer that trust through to the community because you've got none to give. So Dave and Cheryl, his predecessor, created a really good management structure for us to be able to achieve that.
Sorry, Mike, just one last thing I think is also, you can fall into the trap to assume that everyone's drinking from the placemaking sort of Kool-Aid can. And I think there's probably one project where I think Keegan and I got a few regrets. We worked hard to set up this Palmy Unleashed place activation program, and we assumed that everybody, and the irony was it was the mayor's baby. He worked with Peter Smith to help set it up, and we had a new general manager come in that then after setting it up, it was passed on to them, and we assumed that they'd just run with it, and it died a slow death, unfortunately. And I think there's a resuscitation plan that we can look at, but don't assume that everyone's drinking from the Kool-Aid, which I guess is part of this conversation today.
Yeah.
I think the other.
Oh, you go, Sarah. Sorry.
Sorry, I was just going to say the other element to your manager stepping away is, and I can attest to Mike as a previous manager supporting in this way, that you often operate in areas that are quite grey, or normally from a risk perspective we might be saying no to. So having that support of your manager saying, well, why not? Yeah, go explore. You know that they're allowing you almost to fail as well, and will support you in that, is very important, to be able to take those risks and step outside the framework that you maybe used to be operating in as well.
Well, I think, and it's some good segues in there. There's probably a few to the next question, which was about, we sometimes have colleagues who are scared of change or hide behind process or just say no. So how have you handled these situations? And, you know, is there some success stories or things that you've done to encourage them to think differently, or to get behind it, or to actually sort of engage in a placemaking approach? So I want to kick us off with that.
I can kick us off if that's okay.
Yeah.
So this is really an ongoing issue. So to achieve the type of things that our program, which is called Village Policing Projects, it's a focus on suburban retail strips and improving the public realms around them, to support local businesses, to create a sense of community, to create character, all those nice things. We're constantly hitting snags and challenges, particularly with our transport planning colleagues. I'd say that's the one area that's needed really a lot of work. So, and this probably goes back to the previous comments on the previous question, is that there's got to be a will at the higher levels with our managers to take on board these potential conflicts and help resolve them. So to just get a no answer from a colleague, no, you can't do that, it doesn't meet our standards, it's not right, we're not supporting it, end of story. That used to be the end of the story. Now it's not the end of the story anymore. It's like, let's unpack that and work it through. In extreme cases, one case that we've dealt with where internal council officials wouldn't sign off on something that we felt had really great placemaking outcomes, we said, well, can we take it external, get an external engineer to sign off on it, which we did, and it's being implemented. So that's an extreme case. Obviously, you'd want to get your team on board with it in the first instance.
I agree with Joanne, that it's a ongoing issue. I have a meeting that is, I call it almost the no meeting, and it's a mix of people that have the permit roles. So, you know, their policies are quite black and white. So I've tried various approaches, and these days I don't see it as the no meeting, I see it as the facts meeting. They're giving me the facts as it stands, and then it's myself as the advocate for the community, if we're doing some kind of project, is to kind of interpret those facts, find the grey, find the navigate those paths. And I think by doing that and finding those ways, you do very slowly start to show, okay, this policy does allow to do this, but perhaps we can longer term change the wording to make it more user friendly, for example, is one way I'm tackling that no meeting. The other side of things is find those champions, those ones that are already navigating those systems, working outside the box a little bit, to partner with and involve them in those meetings as much as you can, because they've got the experience of finding the ways around the various council policies as well.
And Sarah, also I find that we've really stepped up and reevaluated how we do community engagement, because that is such a powerful argument. If you're saying 80%, for example, on projects, 80% of respondents want a pedestrian crossing moved because it's in the wrong place. It's much harder for engineers that are only looking at standards, for example. I feel like I'm picking on traffic engineers, not meaning to. It's such a powerful argument when you get the numbers back and you can quantify what does this community need and want. And it's getting the right engagement processes so that that information can be very powerfully used. And we use that with politicians as well. This is what we've been told. This is what people really need. These are what the issues are and how we can solve them. Let's do that as the starting point.
Yeah, I like that. The other side of things we've done is we've done a risk assessment where we've looked at the positives and negatives, and almost with the positives, it's what is the risk of not doing this? You know, what are the benefits the community are missing out on? And we did that very successfully with our street meet program, which is our street party and play street program. We got to the point where it was like, yeah, it's too risky not to enable this almost, and our risk team were on board with it. And yeah, how about you, Keegan? I think you work very well in this space.
Again, it's from some of the really agile setup that kind of Geoff and David kind of poached, so kind of stealing from some of their ideas and carrying that through as and Dave might want to put his earmuffs on sometimes with some of the stuff I say like now, but there's a balance between permission and forgiveness, and so some things are very agile and will not happen if you have to drag them through a process, because I suppose the proportionality of the project to the process does not match up, and it's just not worth the effort. Yeah. So at the moment, someone's painting 2 murals on a couple of bollards down one of our streets in the city centre, and we've made a call not to ask permission from anyone else internally and let them go ahead and do it. And that's because they're going to contribute something really awesome to the street. It's not going to take much time. It's already intuitively safe. And we know that some of our staff can't help but think about the precedent-setting nature of things, and that can stop you and paralyze you from actually letting things happen now. So we're not going to all of a sudden see 1 million different murals popping up without notice. We're going to see 2 bollards show up, and it's really cool. We can talk about precedent later down the track if we end up with 2 million people living in Palmerston North. The other thing, I suppose, that I just want to tap into is I found it really useful for particularly my engineering colleagues, is being able to do your own homework beforehand and actually try and have a bit of a gist on the issues that you foresee from their experience point, and then it spins the issue to they're actually helping coach you through the issues and how to think about them properly, and you can carry that knowledge through from project to project. So at its most extreme, I'm a site traffic management supervisor qualified to close roads because I needed to learn the language for a colleague of mine, and now our relationship is actually really good because we've got that mutuality of understanding there. Wouldn't have gotten anywhere if I kept hitting a brick wall with them, you know, because we're speaking past each other. But shush.
I think sometimes those staff that say no, you know, that they're responsible for the management of the asset, and they take quite a personal responsibility for that. So I know one of the things I've been talking to a colleague about recently is talking more about our infrastructure and our assets and the community's assets. And so because I think sometimes it's the fear of that person who's responsible for that asset being, you know, criticised or held to account or something. So I think the more we can give those staff the confidence that we're working alongside them, and that you know, these assets that we're using in different ways are actually community assets that everyone's responsible for. So, you know, I had a conversation this week, and it was all my, and I was like, no, these are our assets. These are we're all working for the council and the community. So I think just trying to depersonalize that connection, I think, to the assets that are responsible, feel that they feel they're personally responsible for.
Yeah, I'll jump in there with that, David, and I think one of the best things we can do is to take people on that journey of, as Joanne said, unpacking things and unbundling the resistance to change. And one of the tactics that we used to do was the what is allowed meeting. So similar to what Sara was saying around the no meeting or the facts meeting, but actually just flipping it on its head so that we can follow the path of least resistance. We can start showing things rather than talking about ideas. We can move into those concrete concrete examples, and then start pushing the limits of like, okay, if we do this, will it work? If not, well, what about that? I think part of it comes through experience as well, is like knowing what the alternatives are, and also not being too fixed in our own mindset as placemakers or designers on what outcomes we need. Like there's certainly no one right way to do placemaking. So like there has to be that flexibility both ways to take on what other people are saying and sort of meet them in the middle. So that was very practical way of doing it. But I think bringing their knowledge in starts building that relationship and building that trust and starts building that culture as well.
So and this is some great segues, thanks folks, in terms of, I must have got these questions right in terms of flow, but then the work internally, and then you personally, I think, having been in placemaking for a while, sometimes it's not isolated because I think you have people around you, but it can be quite tough, and can be adversity. I'm quite a positive person, but I sometimes feel, you know, that hitting your head against a brick wall or particular people you can't get through to. But how are some ways and things that you've maintained your courage and sort of positivity in the face of adversity, particularly pushing through these things, because it does take time, we've heard, but what are some things you've done personally to sort of help keep you going, and who are those people you sort of talk to and relate to help with that?
From the Village Precinct Projects program perspective, we face, also adversity is quite a good term, but we face blockages or limitations, or there's some ideas that we have a fantastic team of designers who on every project is trying to maximize the outcomes and test something new that we haven't done before, whether it's, you know, using a certain type of recycled furniture, whether it's solar powered lighting, there could be a whole range of things. And we, on one particular project, we really were keen to create some kind of a graphically designed pedestrian crossing, which is done all over the world. We see beautiful examples where there's paintwork and it just looks lovely. There was no ways that we could get this approved. We had to move on from that. It wasn't approved, it didn't happen. The pedestrian crossing did happen though, so that was good, like functionality improved. And we took those lessons learned, and we're now at the next stage where we've been able to find a space where we can do that as a demonstration, and it's converting essentially a driveway into a shared zone. So without that learning experience, that didn't materialize in a great outcome or the outcome we wanted. We didn't lose hope. We had to get to a point, and I know that designers, we all get very emotion invested, and you know, it's disappointing when we can't achieve what we wanted, but to understand, we learned through that process, and now we're actually have a project where we found a suitable site as a demonstration, and that should take us to the next level after that. Well, if this could be done, what about that? Let's revisit that idea. So it's a bit of a process.
I think that maintaining your well-being and managing your hungers through these processes is really important, because they are incredibly draining. And I've observed Geoff initially, and then Keegan picking up the sort of the leadership in our space, and we've had some other staff involved for periods of time. And Keegan probably won't, I hope he doesn't mind me saying this, but in recent times we've sort of diverted him away from some placemaking onto some other projects, just to kind of have some time out and some fresh air and doing some other things, because it can, that constant battle about trying to get projects across the line can be incredibly draining. And thinking about where you are at in your life stage, because I think placemaking can require you to do the sorts of things, maybe work some weird hours, connect with some community groups, be out there on the weekend, and depending on where you're at in your life stage, your availability and energy for that sort of stuff can transition. So I think we had someone in our team that was working alongside Geoff for a period of time and running the food truck events at night, and he got a new wife and in his 40s, had a couple of kids, and it was like, oh, hang on, I'm going to go back and do a bit more traditional stuff now. So I think being self-aware and managing your hungers so that you can continue to contribute is And that probably applies to everything other than placemaking. So, but particularly so, I think, given the drain that it can place on you. And I think, Geoff, you know, saw you know, late in your time at Palmy, you were sort of, I think, ready for some fresh air. So, yeah.
Yeah, definitely you can get tapped out. I'd say the way to maintain it is to take those sources of energy from wherever they come, whether it's external stakeholders, whether it's other designers within your own team or across local government. But really, it's kind of like being lazy, like taking the path of least resistance. And also, what Joanne said, like about timing and like that something might not be quite ready, and that you have to sort of bide your time and let things emerge rather than forcing things. And I think that this is a good observation, David, that you need to be aware of yourself and other people's positions and what people can commit to.
And sometimes it's just good to move on to something more positive. Like, we can get really upset and dissatisfied that we haven't achieved our outcome, but at some point, and we get that out in the open as a team and we express everything we need to, and then we put aside and move on to something positive. So it's not holding on to a sort of a sense of disappointment or failure, because that's not what it is. It's all just part of the journey that you're on. Put a time limit on mourning that outcome and move on to something else.
I think it's important to have a mix of projects on the go, isn't it? Because they'll always be at different stages or at different there may be a roadblock, to be able to put your energy into something that's moving along at that point in time. It's really important. I've also found that energy comes from unlikely places as well. So often going back out to the elected members have been really supportive when I am not getting potentially that support internally, and working from that perspective has been very successful. And I think the knowing that what the outcome could be from that community idea or passion is the thing that I keep going back to when I'm facing those roadblocks. It's that passion to keep filling that well, to keep pushing forward with the concept.
Just a final comment on that before you move on, Mike, is there was a really good whakaaro from, I think it was Peter McGlashan, I think it was yesterday, at the Waka Kotahi presentation on kind of placemaking and innovating streets. And he kind of definitely touched on the point around working at the pace of the community. That's not just good customer service, but it also means that everyone's involved when the energy level's right and kind of at that equilibrium point across all parties. So if the community's got stuff on, they've got stuff on, don't push them just because it's convenient for you. And likewise, really mihi to their efforts if they're really energized and passionate at the time. And sometimes that might not work in with the convenience or what you've got on, but actually, you do have to capture that moment. And that's really just feeds your own energy quite well.
And there was a mantra, I'll just finish off. There was a mantra we had at Adelaide a little while, but match energy with energy, which helped find and go with the energy levels that are out there externally and internally, and then your own sometimes, amongst the team. So so I think we'll keep going. There's so many more questions, but there's little time. But the next is sort of about mechanics, a couple of things about the mechanics and systems and processes. Local governments can often be risk averse, which can sometimes be a detriment to the placemaking approach. How have you adapted systems and processes to be able to take appropriate risks, if the appropriate term, but some risks effectively?
I'll just say one of our unlikely heroes that we had in recent years was our health and safety manager, Edward Dennis, who's now moved on to the Mid-Central DHB. But he had a really refreshing approach on health and safety and risk assessment in particular, where he didn't have his nose in a book and was just reading standards, and malicious compliance overrode actual risk intelligence, I suppose. He was actually trying to foster good behaviours and culture that led to people thinking with the right things in mind, and actually built a lot of intuitive stuff. And I suppose he kind of got some good reciprocation from officers like myself and others in the doing role, where we were able to quite effectively show our working and have good backups in place for risk and assessing risk. And so we've built on his some of the templates and other bits and pieces that he provided, because we could properly understand the kaupapa from that realm. And so it spun what is just complete risk and is innately assumed to be adverse to something that was actually quite healthy. So it was just really, really cool to see. And we've been using that since.
We've had similar opportunities with our risk team that have that outlook to risk is about just how do you manage it? You know, how do you get this off the ground, and working with them on, like I mentioned with the street parties, that what's the positive benefits of it that outweighs not doing it. So let's get it happening. The second point, COVID, you know, with it does have some silver linings. And for us, one of the processes we changed was our grants, and we reworked our grants to benefit people like musicians that weren't getting gigs anymore, to get people back into businesses offering customer experiences. And normally with all our grant programs, it would be you know, 1 month funding round, then you'd assess them and put them up to council, and you know, perhaps 3 months later is when people would be getting their outcome. But because we had to respond quickly, people needed support now, we actually introduced an internal assessment group, which was managers, and we got that sign off from the council. So we're actually assessing grants twice a week during COVID. So people would literally put it in, and 2 days later they would have their outcome, and they're getting amounts of funding anywhere between $2,000 and $5,000. And that process is staged. So the elected members could see they trust us, can see the benefit. And yeah, now we still have similar grants, and it's a weekly assessment that we offer for these grants.
Great. So there was a delegation you got, Sarah.
Yeah, the change of the delegations,
yep.
has improved our speed. Yeah.
Great.
I'll respond to Tiffany's question that she's put in about convincing argument for improving the experience of place when traditional data doesn't indicate there's an issue. And that in placemaking, we've never really come across a comprehensive package of appropriate data that really builds our arguments of what we're doing. So we do use data that's available to try and reinforce and explain what we're doing. And often we're having to build arguments for people, whether it's politicians or managers that are very database people. So they want to see the numbers. You know, how do you do that when you're talking about placemaking and improving people's lives through placemaking? So in addition to looking at data such as, we have credit card spend, which doesn't help us that much because it encompasses a very large area to avoid privacy issues and things like that. We do look at mobile data movement, so where are people staying and stopping, and we've developed our own system of analyzing data as well. So we will do a pre-project analysis, which we've customized ourselves about how much shade is there, what is the temperature, because we have these massive heat island effects in Brisbane. How are people rating this area? Can you sit somewhere? Or the whole gambit of placemaking outcomes, in no seats, and then we'll do that again afterwards, and we'll be able to provide that data to decision makers or politicians or the public to say, we've had a 40% improvement in shade cover, which has meant our pedestrian counts are now up, and pedestrian counts can show how many more people are visiting an area. There's seating, there's other elements of enjoyment in the space. So you may, Tiffany, you may need to develop something bespoke to be able to address those outcomes.
Oh, and is there anything else from the team, or maybe sort of transition to the next question, which was time is of the essence in placemaking often. and again, local government's not necessarily seen as the fastest mover sometimes. We talked about Sara sort of changing some things to get stuff going fast through COVID, which is stuck. But is there other examples where you've changed processes to get things going at a particular pace that supports the community energy or the things that need to happen?
David Ingwich worked with our guys to put in place, in particular, like a get out of jail free card, and it's an official council document, and it's a really fantastic piece of work, and it's essentially just a card that says in the front, if you inadvertently contravene a bylaw or regulation of council, because we know how many there are to read through if you just want to do something cool, then present this card if you get bailed up on the street, basically, by someone in regulatory or whatnot, a rubbernecker. And on the other side, it'll have David's name or my name or whatnot. And essentially what it does is it deflects the conflict back in-house so that we can maintain the enthusiasm in the community, give them the confidence also up front that they've got someone in their camp from inside the system, if you will, and also allows us to have some good measured conversation and candid conversation with those that have concerns in-house as well. So we're leveraging our trusting relationships that we've built inside, so that it's not so adverse out in the community there, and it's absolutely fantastic.
Yeah, and we haven't really pushed those for a while, Keegan, have we? But the people that have them, the community hold on to them like they're sort of, I think they keep them safer than their passport.
I want.
Yeah.
Extreme example for us, I think you've got to look at local governments as a machine, and Brisbane Council was an extreme version of that, one of the biggest machines to deliver value to our customers in cities. And when we're trying to do new things such as tactical urbanism, I think we've got to be realistic about what is going to be able to change within that big structure, within that big machine. But the only way to figure out what needs to change is by working through things and by doing the demonstration projects. And I think what we've seen in our design-led city strategy is that at the highest levels, we have buy-in of the adopted strategy that creating great places are a priority for the council, that demonstration and pilot projects are a priority action, and then that we get the buy-in at that highest level, and whether it's communications, procurement, projects teams, designers, that high level buy-in allows us to then push the limits in certain areas. But I think what's trying to do everything at once. So in terms of changing processes, like one of the things we targeted in the first round was, of course, the risk assessment and getting a tailored approach for that fitted a 6 to 8 week project rather than a permanent project for like in Joanne's area, and so making sure that we've got things tailored to the right to the outcome we're seeking in our big machine seems to be a real win for us.
I think the other thing is tapping into policies and things early on that you may not realise it may have a bigger impact down the track. Like we've got a food truck policy, for example, with designated places throughout the city. It pays to be involved in that kind of thing, because if you can put in a few different areas, then you've got in your toolkit down the track, hey, we're allowed to do food trucks. You didn't know it was going to be useful at the time, but then something comes along where you go, hey, we've actually got all these stuff in place that comes together, with we can do busking, we can have food trucks, and all of a sudden you've got all the elements that you can tap into and utilize. And the other thing on that is the importance of I'm trying to say, like, oh, sorry, I've lost my train of thought there, Mike.
That's all good.
Yeah.
That's a good one. I think we've got about 6 or 7 minutes left, so I might actually throw to a couple of questions. I've just been trying to keep an eye on the chat as well. I've got a ton of questions which we haven't even got through, but we'll leave those. We could probably do a few hours on this, but I see one from our friend Yang Ling all the way from Singapore, I think, is watching by the looks of things. So it's about how do we upgrade our knowledge and skills? What skill sets should we as government officers be equipped with to do our jobs better? And I think that's internally, and then as a network and as a movement in the country, how can we better equip, and what do we need to be asking for? Is there any reflections on that?
I'll go. I've learned a huge amount through working with Geoff Wilkinson on things that involve a lot of design thinking, kaupapa, and particularly useful around process improvement and building pilots and moving those pilots through into permanence or influencing policy. That's definitely an area that we utilise a lot in trying to nut through issues.
Yeah, one of my favourite PPS slides is, each discipline to become its own audience. And I think that's getting at the heart that, for a long time, planners have spoken to planners and engineers have spoken to engineers, and landscape architects have spoken to landscape architects. So that whole idea of being an inquisitive expert is a culture we've been trying to promote in Palmy, and rather than talking about ourselves as those disciplines, talking about ourselves as city makers, or so it doesn't matter whether you're working in parks or transport or landscape, that you build that philosophy through an organisation that you're a city maker, and that means knowing a little bit more about what each other does is a good thing. And I think for a long period of time, it was kind of like, don't step into my space, thank you very much. You don't have the ticket or the qualification or the whatever it is. And so that's, we've had some of our other staff that haven't been actively leading placemaking now sort of referring to themselves as city makers and projects that they're leading out and championing a placemaking approach themselves. So that, yeah, I think it's, so I'm not sure I maybe answered the question, but I think, if encouraging people to be inquisitive about all the bits that make a city work will make us all better placemakers.
And go where that leads you, I think, David. So like Keegan said, he's got his traffic management. We did the same with our street meets because our transport team didn't have the time to take on all the road closures and traffic management plans with street parties. So we took that on, and it has changed the type of conversation we can have. We can speak to them on the same level. And I think, yeah, going where the community's interests are and then skilling yourself up in that area is really useful.
Yeah, I agree with both the speakers, David and Sarah. What we try to do, and we probably need to do even more of it, is identify where it is that we may have a skills shortage and where there is valuable skills in council. Like Geoff said, Brisbane Council is a huge machine, and get these experts to come and talk about their projects and talk about what they need from us and how they can work better with us. I think we're really doing more and more of that. Where we maybe not doing so well is going back to them and talking about how we're doing things. So we need to work on that side of things as well. But it's a constant environment, placemaking, where you have to constantly be learning and looking around and, how's it best been done? What is best practice? Which is why it's exciting and engaging.
Okay,
just to jump in there, Mike. I just wanted to say, like, in upgrading our skill sets, we can't undervalue the role of the external voice, and people like Mike, coming in to an organisation and talking about their experience and stretching what people think about themselves. So people like, for our experience through placemaking in Palmy early, David Enbridge or Charles Landry, and then from the Adelaide crew, like of that, changing how people see themselves, and changing people from playing the role that they might have thought that they were doing into one that is more focused, like as David says, as a city maker, or more outcome focused and more of a person. That to me has been the single most transformative part of my career, is when we've had those experts or prominent people in different industries come in and share their way of doing things.
That's great. Well, we're getting to the very end of our official time, so we're going to cut it off shortly. We will continue at 1 to 1:30 because there's actually a lot of questions in the chat. I've been trying to go through them and get to them. We're not going to get to all of them, but in the session, the next little session, I think we will try to get to some of those and keep that discussion going. But I did want to just say a big thank you to the panelists, the crew that we would, hopefully normally we have conferences one day where you can all sit together and someone's sharing a microphone around and all that sort of stuff. But it's been really great. I've been thrilled to be able to get this group of people together because they're really insightful, great fun, and hopefully in future we can do it face to face. But I thanks everyone to give the thumbs up to the panel. It's been really useful. So thank you, Sara and Joanne, Geoff over in Aussie, and then David and Keegan and Palmerston North. And I'm sure that they will be happy in the future to continue to sharing. It's been great from us, the team at Placemaking Aotearoa, to have you all here today. And we want to keep that continued conversation going about, particularly for me, I'm passionate about local government and getting it right and embedding this practice and seeing change that sort of ripples through all that we do. And so we just want this to be the start of these sort of conversations. So we're sort of going to wrap it up there so people can leave if they want, but feel free in a couple of minutes to hang around, and we'll just have an after party sort of session, maybe go through some of these questions. I see Frith down there. I didn't get to your question, Frith. We'll talk about that. But yeah, so thanks very much again. Thanks to Denise and Sophia at Catalyze for being the tech gurus in behind and making sure I didn't drop off or the sound was going. And yeah, if you've got other questions, put them in the chat or stick around. So thanks very much, everyone. It's been lovely to have you.
And just a mihi to you, Mike, for your leadership. Thanks for threading us all together and herding the cats, and some really good questions that come through. And there's a whole host of thoughtful questions that Mike put forward we didn't quite get around to, so we could always do a part 2 sometime, eh?
Yeah. Some more juicy ones.
Very much, Mike.
Yeah,
no problem.
Also, just want to flag to people, if they're on a bit of a roll as far as webinars go, I might share a link that's starting at 1:30. Hopefully I can share a link. I can't share a link. I'll share it to the Placemaking Aotearoa Google group then, because I believe that there is a talk from Greer Hawley from NZTA on the latest updates of the Play Streets initiative and what Waka Kotahi have been doing to de-screw the system as far as the code of practice of traffic management. Sara knows the pain, so I'll share that off.
Yeah. So yeah, so for those sticking around, so thanks if you're gonna hang around with us. So I might chuck a question out, and anyone we can just discuss this, because I think we want to work on how we grow this network across our country, and hopefully Sara and Joanne and Geoff will be doing that the same across Australia with their colleagues. But one of the questions from Frith, and I'd say congratulations, Frith, on your wonderful Place Leaders Award. You must be getting sick of that, but well done.
Thought Leader of the Year.
Can I say congratulations back to you, Mike Fisher, on your Placemaking Award? So
Frith has asked, how do we build empathy/sympathy between those in the machine? And we've talked about the machine being council of big machines like Brisbane to smaller machines like Palmerston North or the Charles Sturts, and those outside. Is it something we should be trying to do, or is tension part of the puzzle? Really interesting question. And I'm open that to anyone who's listening and who's still with us, because I think there could be some interesting observations from other people as well. So has anyone got a reflection? How do we build empathy and sympathy? And is it something we should try to do?
I think one step is going out to people and places. It's very easy to make comments in an office and make a very different decision. And so it's often good to get a group of people to go out and experience firsthand, and that changes the impression and potentially the response.
Yeah, I think taking the time to engage with a person, presumably a person or a group who have specific issues that require your empathy, assuming that behind the question. Taking the time to really consider, and even if your project can't, what we do is, if our projects are not going to address that issue, but we know it's a big concern, it's been quite upfront about that, but then also assisting that personal group to get in touch with the right people. So we do a fair amount of that, and I think it's it does definitely result in some good outcomes.
And it starts to remove the assumptions I think people can easily make. Yeah, and like you say, get to know in detail, Joanne. I think that's a really good point.
I've had some recent success with, I suppose, our environmental health team, as far as actually giving them the tools to be leaders as far as banging the drum for getting businesses on board to utilise the street to their advantage. And it's just like pull a ripcord and let it roll. It's just gone awesome, and it's all down to having good kōrero, good conversations with our environmental health staff so that they can actually provide an even more enriching service to their customers, you know, being businesses that they're doing food verifications for or whatnot. So they're not just seen as the dork with the clipboard, but they're also seen as, hey, while I'm here, I noticed that you're not utilising the 7-metre width footpath that you've got out there. You know that we don't charge for that, eh? And you know you can take up to like 1.8 metres or take everything apart from 1.8 metre clearway, blah, 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 all that stuff. And look, brollies, and if you want to bolt a planter box into the ground, you know, here we go, you know. And so it's all that value add stuff. And so like I can now step back and it's like they're just making magic, and we can see through a lot of our we do like kind of street engagement counts in terms of how engaged the street different businesses are, how that works with our outcomes, and you can see the numbers ticking up because of their good graft that they're doing. Yeah.
And it shares the workload by the sounds of it, Keegan, as well. If you're
Absolutely.
all supporting each other, there's empathy in that, isn't there? Because you start to understand the environmental health team's issues and challenges and vice versa. Yeah.
Yeah, and it's what's driving them, what's motivating them. You know, are they're actually the key pin drop moment was, oh, look, we want to be more than just a regulator when we go out and talk to these people, because we're maintaining an ongoing relationship. Yeah.
Wow, that's powerful.
It is, and there's more than just a regulator, and what is it? Pull the ripcord and let it roll.
I'm from that Beyblade generation. I'm sorry.
It's a great. So we'll quote you on that.
It's a millennial on me.
Yeah. I'm sure David will quote you on that.
There might be some additional freedoms that smaller councils have over the large machines in terms of record pulling.
Is there anything? It's a good reflection, Joanne. Is there anything you do or think about at the big beast of it? Like, there's obviously Auckland Council, which is big, and Brisbane, the likes of Brisbane City, down to the Palmerston. Is there anything that big councils you think can do, or could do better, in terms of that sort of empathy and understanding with those outside?
I don't know, for maybe this is. Go on, Joe.
Oh no, sorry, Geoff. You want to?
I'll go. No, I'll go after you. I'll go after you.
Geoff and I work very well together. Yes, well, I'm saying the real positive of the big council, and I've worked for small councils as well, is that there's a considerable financial investment in placemaking. So my program has $10 million, which is quite considerable to deliver 10 projects across 4 years. Plus, Geoff has budget for his. We both do, as well as the physical improvements, we do activations, things like that. So for the smaller councils, it's motivating how to get capital budgets. How do you get a budget? Because placemaking can be expensive, whether it's a small intervention or something much more substantial. It's a hell of a lot easier if you've got a budget behind you and you can, roll out improvements that way. So that is a big plus. I'm not sure, I think councils vary, but in the case of Brisbane City Council, our elected officials, our ward councillors, are very hands-on, and that is a plus and a minus depending on which way you look at it. So they're very hands-on on our project, down to wanting to influence artwork according to their tastes. That can be a bit of a challenge, but at the same time, coming back to the question of empathy, I do personally find that our ward councillors are often the first stop for someone who has a real issue or problem with council or with their environment or whatever it is. That's their first stop, and then it gets deflected or it gets passed on to us to deal with. So there's a big role in that area for ward councillors to really be at the heart of their community. And for the most part, it does seem that they are performing that well.
I'd go with, just to build on that, Joe, and this probably some for Frith as well. In the very big councils, something I think we need to improve is around the cross-cultural design and cross-cultural communication. There's huge variation in the makeup of our communities, huge variation in the priorities of those people. I am what I am. I'm, middle-class white person, and from New Zealand. And even some of my assumptions around, how Australians might value things are different than what the Kiwis value. And so it is quite a steep learning curve when you go into communities. And that's from the council minion perspective. From the consultant perspective, one thing which was probably the biggest benefit to us is that we were outsiders, but then we also would embed ourselves within a community, for a week, 3 or 4 days, and basically, because we didn't have an office, we would be living in the local stakeholders area, sitting in their cafes for hours. We'd have the random chats. People would bump into you onto the street when you were doing your site assessments and so on. And just that time in the community is a huge benefit, just to build that network. And then those consultants, if they are working in that way, can then provide that sort of sounding board for mediating what the community is saying. As Joe says, where there's an axe grinder or a complaint or something, there can be certain pathways that goes down, but you might miss out on all the positive things and ideas that are coming along. And we don't necessarily have good ways to listen. So that's probably the second point I would say we need to improve on.
Mm. And I've just got a great question from Gemma that I've just seen just drop in. So thank you, Gemma. So how do you come back and regain community trust after poorly delivered and maintained projects have let the outcomes or the community down and get scared council managers to try again? So any reflections on that? I've got probably a couple of things, but I'd be interested to hear if there's any reflections on that, particularly those.
That's assuming it's, Gemma, that it's a council delivered project. Assume from your question. What I would say when we've had situations where things haven't gone that well, we need to get in there and fix it. Like that's the best solution, is if you identify that the quality is poor, you're saying there's maintenance issues, outcomes, ideally council needs to commit to say, how can we improve this? On the other hand, we do have projects where we think the outcomes are great, and there's always someone in the community, they didn't want this in the first place, and they will be relentless in their criticism. So I suppose there's two factors to that. But, construction work is always variable, and things can happen and outcomes can be problematic. And part of the project needs to be, if this is not ideal, we need to get in there and fix it. That would be my perspective.
In the city of Charles Sturt, we've had an ongoing project that's tried to get up for over 15 years or so. It's we've got a library and a community centre at Henley, and there's been various ideas floated about combining the two, reducing the scale of them, and each time the community have pretty much rallied overnight and created a website against the idea, and because they didn't want to see the size of their library reduced, even though the numbers were dwindling, for example. So we've got the project up again, and this time we're keeping the library on the existing site, but bringing the community centre over. And the catalyst has been that the building is failing. The trusses of the existing building need to be repaired, and it's been the relationships that we've had with the community development officer at the community centre, really rebuilding those relationships and telling them firsthand what we're trying to achieve, and the same with the library, that has enabled us to then go out and be confident to put on our Your Say consultation site information of the project, because they're a very educated, agile community and very quick to put their opinion out there. So we knew, they could railroad it within quite easily. So it's been bringing all those key players on board in advance before we've put anything out broadly in the public arena.
It's an interesting question though, because often in council it does seem a bit like once a project is done and dusted, that's the end of it, and there may not be a budget to come in and fix it or to assess its outcomes. So that's something as placemakers we need to build on is what next for this project.
And just on the back of that, I think that principle of we know placemaking is more than just a design. It's actually also the management scheme of the place, if you will, the ecosystem that just actually supports and responds to things that are done to it or with it. And so those honest conversations around how do we manage this moving forward is usually quite welcome to the community. I suppose it's really hard if the community is hard to, I suppose, geographically or sector wise hard to identify. If it's just a general community Facebook group page, for instance, that could be made up of anyone in the city. And how do you kind of engage with them on that? Whereas actually, if you have a very specifically defined community that you've done some wrongs to, then at least you can go to the kanohi ki te kanohi and have that cup of tea, that proper listening time, and actually rebuild back an understanding of the issues as they see it. That may not still get to that trust level, and sometimes it might be the messenger or the listener in this case rather than the message being given. One thing I've tried to reinforce to a lot of our infrastructure staff, for instance, who do a lot of project management work, and sometimes they've got the value of having engagement resources, sometimes they don't. So sometimes there's bull in the china shop kind of stuff going on, and it just is what it is. But reinforcing to them that just as much they are physical capital asset managers, the community development teams or whoever are the social capital asset managers. And so they're holding the social capital for the organisation. They're the ones that are often going to be sweeping up after you years after you've left with your project. And so you've got a duty to actually bring them into the tent early on so you can help identify risks and you can actually help to respond to things, and you can leverage off their good relationships as well. So it helps with some mediation. I mean, there's going to be a project I'm involved in on my planning side of things, involved in a village which has had some really big shakeups recently from some central government decisions that are going through at the moment. And so we've been part of that process as a regulator, but I'm expecting to spend quite a bit of time up front, not talking about anything to do with my project, but just to understand what's come through to them recently and what that impact is from their view, so that I'm not I'm going in with my project with full information, I suppose, so I can respond to that. Yeah. Anywho. Yeah.
And I think, I mean, it's the sort of second part of it, the scared managers to try again, which is difficult. I think where I've done it before or been part of it, and some of it does depend on the personalities of your leaders, I suppose, but where it has worked, where you're able to you've broken down and you've understood what went wrong. You've thought quite carefully about whether it's, why the community trust has bottomed out, or whether it could be elected members. There's a whole range of things that might have gone wrong, but you've done some work to analyse that and understand that, so you can show the manager the processes and the things that you'll go through when you want to give. It might be taking that project and giving a slightly different tact, or trying something that's aligned to it, but you've actually showed that leader, that manager, that there's been some learnings of it, because they're the one you want to champion it as well. So you still see there's a good outcome there. Possibly wasn't delivered well, or say it wasn't maintained, like you said, Gemma, but the manager being able to be armed with that information of why it didn't, and then what the things you're putting in place to change that. And we've had that in Adelaide and others, where you can really give that manager the ammunition and the tools to be able to talk about it, so they feel like they're not scared, that there is a reason it didn't happen, and we're going to move on from that and do something differently. As I say, it has depended on the personality of the leader, the ones who get that, and you can have that sort of conversation with. There is one or two I've come across over my 22 odd years now who maybe maybe harder to have that conversation, but it is certainly being able to give them the tools and understanding that you've actually thought about it, you've listened, you're going to do something different next time, and that maybe there's some different personalities within the project that it needed to be changed or whatever. You might have brought in the engagement team, you've talked to the community governance or whoever it might be, that the teams change, the disciplines have changed to make sure that it's going to stick and going to be delivered well. So I'm just wary of time. So one of the things I probably, for the ones who are left who are not in our little organising committee of Placemaking Aotearoa, is understanding what can we do to support this within local government. And if you've got a comment, that'd be great. But as I said, I'm passionate about local government, and they're often the pivot point between things getting done or not. And I think, how do we grow this as a movement? How can we support? And this is a question for the royal we, because we aren't a group that do everything for people, but we want people to come in and we support other projects and mahi getting going. But what is it, the things that we think could happen across the country to really grow this within local government? Because we want to upskill leaders, we want to grow new champions, we want to see great projects being done. Is there some things that we, as I say, as a collective could be doing or should be thinking about, for our next year's sort of work and the next couple of years, the things that we could be doing in local government? Any commentary on that? Feel free to speak up. You can unmute yourself now. It's a free-for-all after party, so don't be shy.
I've got a request. On Placemaking Aotearoa website, there's a learn page, and was it you, Sara, talking about the tools that you're using, risk and benefit, things like that? One of the things that we can do really easily, because we're all working in, well, we're all volunteering our time or tacking it onto our jobs, so it's extra, is share stuff. So if you've got tools to share, the get out of jail free card might be put up as a template perhaps for other councils to easily adapt. That sort of thing would be really good. There's books also that you can just add yourself, so make it easy for people to find out. We get a lot of kind of conversations about what is placemaking in 101, and we don't want to put a definition on that. But if you can share what's working for you, then people can come up with their own conversations about it, their own thoughts and things like that. So that's my request, just to flip that back, is if you can feed us. Thank you.
I'll just fill in a bit of space. I guess it's been a pleasure to join the New Zealand network. Joanne and I are part of a Queensland network over here that's emerging. It might be that one thing we can do is to invite the Kiwi team over, and I think through networks like this we can identify new and interesting people who are doing good stuff all over the place, and it's definitely, I think, interesting to hear from people who are at all stages of the placemaking journey, whether it's new or established programs, and keep things fresh.
Yeah, I'll second that. That would be a great idea, Geoff.
Yeah.
Placemaking is so all-encompassing and varies across scales for something really quite small, like you were talking about, maybe some engagement on site, right through to infrastructure provision, and finding a way that placemakers and designers can be at the table across council projects, not just in our teams. We're doing it pretty well in our teams, but how do we have a voice on a sort of a broader array of council deliverables? But it's been a great experience, so thank you. It's been great chatting with all of you.
It's been good to have you.
Oh, I was going to, no, I'm on mute, am I?
No, go on, Karen. Yep. You're on, go for it.
Yeah, from New Plymouth, size city similar to Palmerston. I'd just like to say this has been great to reconnect and reactivate all my placemaking cells. And great to see the website, and I've just been playing around on that in the last few days. So I think there's heaps of resources there, so that's really cool. I guess as somebody that just is now thinking that we've got our new central city strategy in place, and there's just so many exciting opportunities for placemaking, I'm thinking, right, what do I need to do? So I think it's the opportunity to have one-on-one conversations with people, maybe I don't know, think about what resources I need, connections within council. I mean, we've got a very cross-council relationships all over the place anyway, but to pull that together around a placemaking conversation. So I'm just really thinking we've got lots of elements in place. So it's probably just one or two people having a conversation to help me think about it would, I guess, and just want to congratulate you for putting this together and having all those resources. So when I'm needing them, they're there. So just big thumbs up.
Right. Well, thanks, Karen. That's what we want to do. We want to keep growing the resources and the network. And I think it's great to have those people you can chat to, you know. And we actually sort of plug for the sort of I think it's called our white pages, you know, that Ryan Keegan and the team have been working on, you know, some go-to names who are doing stuff, some people who are out there in our local Aotearoa community, and we've got connections beyond, because the problems aren't necessarily new, but there's some good experience there to be able to share. And I think one of the things within local government we did at Adelaide, I can remember, just to build the internal team early on, was the facilitators, and Sara was one of these, and the places just brought together all the disciplines across council right when we started some project and looking at some places, and said, right, throw everything you know on a map, come in and just tell us everything. We're just here to listen about your bikeway you're going on, you're upgrading the lighting, you're going to paint a rainbow crossing, you know, whatever it is, we're doing the park up wide, scrub the toilets. So all those different people come in to start the conversation about, actually, you're all in this place, you're all doing stuff in this place which has a you know, hopefully a positive impact, but sometimes negative. So I hope a positive, and get them to think about, right, all the interconnections and the differences and the things that they're doing that contribute or not to that, which was a really good starting point for some of our work in Adelaide, getting people to think, oh my goodness, yeah, I didn't know you're doing a bikeway, or I didn't know the community government's person or whatever is having to deal with angry residents, you know. So it started that conversation about, actually, we're all in this together, and we've all got things that we can do, and the investments we're making are really important to get right and to do amongst as a team in the council. So it's not just left to the placemaking team or that facilitator or that designer or whoever. Yeah,
it sets the scene that you're not there to step on anyone's toes. It is about a partnership, doesn't it?
Yeah. So is there anything else before we wrap up? Just been trying to get through. There was a question about COVID and the transition from temporary to permanent. I've sort of lost it. There's a lot of stuff in the chat now, which is great. But is there any reflections on COVID and the transition from taking those temporary to permanent? And I love your example, Sara, with the grants. That's fabulous. Is there anything else people have been doing in COVID and then out of COVID and then trying to make into a permanent sort of arrangement at all?
I can share a bit of a pain of mine that I still carry from the first lockdown, where we didn't get anything done, but I believe we did help with maybe Auckland and Nelson getting it done. So when lockdown is first happening, lots of people had a bit of extra time to do some manage recreation in their own neighbourhoods and things like that. And so our river, which is just a stone's throw away, we had a lot of people walking or cycling to the corridors of the river. That was meaning that people couldn't actually socially distance without actually stepping out onto the road effectively. And so we had made some attempts to actually put in place some temporary footpath extensions, things like that. Despite even having a legal opinion from our lawyers and also the support from Waka Kotahi, so mihi to them, still couldn't get it across the line with our transport team. So that was a big dumb. But the cool thing is we could share that out to other people and be like, hey, look, it's just for some reason, it's not for us, but if you want to use what we've prepared, save yourself some legal fees, then by all means.
Learn from us. Yeah. Well, great. Well, thanks everyone. I think we can let everyone go, and well, our Australian cousins will probably be getting close to lunchtime where I'm keen to eat something. So thanks for joining. Thanks for the panel again. And yeah, definitely connect with our network. We've got another session tomorrow, the Aotearoa session, and there'll be some more. So watch our website and interact. And yeah, as I say, we're a royal we here. So we're all want to put the hand to the plow, share stuff, and get involved as much as you can. So thanks everyone for joining in. Take it easy.
Thanks, guys.
See you later. Thanks.
See ya.